All righty. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
This is the meeting of the Policy Review Committee. I believe that you all received the draft of the minutes from the last meeting we had on September 1st. Are there any changes to those draft minutes that were sent out to you?
I recommend that we approve those minutes.
Okay. If there are no objections to the approval of those minutes from the meeting of September 1st, I'm going to simply direct that they be approved by unanimous consent.
Okay.
All right. We did not have any unfinished business items that I was aware of. Did either of you have any unfinished business items that you believe we needed to bring to your attention today?
I do not. No.
All right. Well, let's get into the business at hand. There are actually three changes to committees of the school board. The first of which is the Pupil Personnel Committee. And the recommendation is to remove the PPC as a committee of the school board, and in place of that, have what is called a Student Services Review Committee that would be an administrative committee that would be appointed by the school superintendent to review decisions made by the discipline officer for Suffolk Public Schools. And the makeup of the Student Services Review Committee will be administrators from the different buildings, as well as administrators from central office would make up the Student Services Review Committee. And then a person would have a right to appeal certain decisions, namely expulsion decisions, to the full school board. So that's what's being proposed in place of a pupil personnel committee. And you'll notice that the changes have been highlighted in yellow for easy identification.
Now, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
This Student Services Review Committee, they would also hear zone waivers, things such as that as well.
I'm sorry, what was that question again?
Would this committee, this proposed Student Services Review Committee, they would also hear or entertain appeals about zone waivers and things such as that?
Correct, they would. They would hear out of school requests, out of zone requests. Yes, they would hear those.
Okay.
And we also looked at some other neighboring school divisions to see if they had an administrative committee to hear these appeals. And in some of our preliminary review of other school divisions, we have learned that some of them do in fact have administrative appeal processing, wherein someone would appeal the initial decision made by whoever is appointed to review discipline actions. Those appeals actually take place administratively.
Mm-hmm.
And then if there is a need for the board to get involved with it, in some situations, there's a further right of appeal to the full board.
Mm-hmm. Right. So in a case of expulsion or long-term situations for a student, would go directly to the board.
Correct. Expulsions would still go to the board. Someone who's been recommended for expulsion, um, or someone, let's say that the student review committee recommends expulsion of a student, that would then come to the full board for the board's consideration.
That would not be just an appeal, but that would be just as a matter of practice, it would come to the board.
Correct.
Okay.
So the student appeal to this new Student Services Review Committee, they would follow the same 5-day rule. Would that apply as well for having to respond if they wanted an appeal to this group?
Yeah, the same procedures that are currently in place that governs the PPC would govern this committee as well. So in terms of how the hearings are conducted, in terms of notice, all of those same requirements would apply. The only major difference in what is done now compared to what is being recommended is we're looking at two things. One is the makeup of the committee, it being an administrative committee versus a school board committee. That's one major change. And then the other major change is the actual people that will be involved. Now you're going to be looking at having building administrators or people from central office that will make up this review committee. And by the way, the way that this is envisioned is that there will be a pool of people that could serve on this committee. And depending on whether it's a high school student or whether it's a middle school student or an elementary student, the people will probably be pulled from those building levels. So they would have some understanding of what's happening out in the field when they're getting these cases on appeal. And it may also lend itself to some consistency in application because they know what's happened in similar situations in other buildings. And so hopefully you may find that there is some consistency in terms of decision making and in terms of the application of policy.
And the administrators that are pulled for this, they would not be involved in the case. They would be neutral people, correct?
Correct. They cannot have any involvement in the initial decision made by the discipline officer, nor any initial action in the recommendation coming from the building. So let's say it's a student from Nassau River. That would mean that no one from Nassau River could be involved in this process.
Right. So no one involved in the case at all. No one on the National River staff could be in that particular case. They'd have to be assigned to another case.
Correct.
The National River could work with a Lakeland student, or Lakeland could work with a National River student. So we mix it up there.
Correct.
Okay. One of the things that I think that we need to make clear and public, since these meetings are open, is why we're making a change. Because I think that's a question too that might come up. And I think that people need to understand that because of the fact that these things have to be public, parents have because we are elected officials, that parents' privacy rights are, there's confusion now with parents' privacy rights, student privacy rights, with regard to the details of their cases in these situations. And so that's why we're looking at doing this differently. And I think that's something that needs to be made clear with regard to changing this particular thing, because I don't want there to be questions along the lines of why we're doing this or what our motives are.
Yeah, there's always a concern about trying to balance public's right to access meetings of this nature versus student rights and student privacy rights. And both of you, having served on the PPC in the past, understand that when they gather for these hearings, especially if you're dealing with a lot of students at one time, and oftentimes those meetings have taken place here at central office. And so they're all downstairs, all in the lobby area and so forth. And so if these meetings are open to the public, anyone from the public could then come in and actually see what students are being disciplined or what students are being recommended for discipline. They may not know exactly what the recommendation is, but they will be able to see that these students have some concerns at the building level. And so a recommendation is being made as it relates to them. By taking this committee away from being a school board committee, it really protects the privacy rights of the students that may be going through this process. Now, I realize there may be those that may think, well, when the school board actually hears the case at a school board meeting, don't you run into the same situation? The answer is yes, but you won't have the same number of students.
Absolutely.
You may have only 1, 2 students at the most that may be coming before the full school board for a hearing. And the other thing is the time for those hearings, oftentimes they occur early on. They occur before the 7 o'clock main meeting of the school board. And so oftentimes you don't have that many people there at the beginning anyway. Most people show up at the 7 o'clock hour. And so there are very few people there at the 5:30 or 6 o'clock hour. So the likelihood that a student's privacy interests may be somehow violated, it's probably pretty small at that point. But keep in mind that when you have a mass group of students all assembling in one place, you run the greater risk that some of their rights could be open to public scrutiny, and I think this in some way will protect those students' rights.
And I think from what you gathered with regard to our neighbors, this is consistent with what most of our neighbors are doing anyway.
Yeah, in fact, my administrative assistant handed me a note just a few minutes ago, and yeah, there are some school divisions that have administrative review committees, which is what this will be. This will be an administrative review committee.
Absolutely.
That will review these appeals.
All right. So I feel pretty good about this.
I think it's in line with what other localities in the region are doing. Right. And the protection of the rights of the student. Very important.
Right. Well, if there are no objections, what we'll do is have this for, I guess, first reading at the meeting next month.
I would like for this to be an action item. And the reason that I'm saying that is because we have so many cases that we see with PPC. So I think that this would be something that might come up as an action item. I know that the committee members, at least 2 of them I've talked to, were interested in doing this in the first place. So if it's possible, if we can get it on the agenda, of course, the board can decide when we meet in full if they don't want to act on it. But I think because the PPC always has a full agenda, that we might want to move this to an item that we look at as looking at it as an action item on the first reading? I
Okay.
don't know. What do you think? What do you all think?
I wouldn't object to that because I think we need to have it as soon as possible implemented myself. I think it would be good to move to have it as an action item, yes.
Well, then what we can do, you can put it on next month as a first reading and adoption, which
Okay.
would mean that you'll be waiving the second reading of it. The other committee change relates to the City Council Liaison Committee. In light of the fact that meetings are being arranged, joint meetings between the school board and city council, I thought that maybe you want to discuss whether or not there's any need to continue to have a city council liaison committee. Because the whole purpose behind the committee was to share information going back and forth between the city and the school board. So if you're now having joint meetings between the two elected bodies, there may no longer be a need for this committee. So I thought I would just put this out there for your discussion and for your consideration to say what you thought about it.
I think it's a great idea. I think that, I know that with when Dr. Whitney was here and we began to have these joint meetings, and before, and now I don't know, because I wasn't on the board before, Ms. Byron can probably give you more information about that than I can, I'm sure. But I understand when this education committee, because it was called something else before, started, the two tops, the mayor, vice mayor, chair, vice chair would get together and discuss education issues. Since we all meet jointly together to discuss the issues, then chair and vice chair, mayor and vice mayor just get together to organize the meeting. It doesn't make any sense so to even have a committee because there's no committee work to do. So I agree that dissolution of the committee makes sense because right now it's really just causing confusion with regard to what the committee function actually is.
And it's never served as a committee.
It's never really been a committee.
No.
Since I've been on the board anyway.
It's been on the books, but no. And with the joint meetings that now are called by the mayor for the two groups, we mutually agree to a date and we meet. And I think that would
That doesn't involve committee work.
right. Committee, right. Yes, I agree.
Yeah, I have no problem with that.
So would you want this on for first reading and adoption, or would you want this on for first reading?
As far as I'm concerned, it could be first.
I think first reading and adoption. Yes. Put it in motion right now. Yeah.
Okay. All right, the next proposed change regarding committees is the Finance Committee. And I received information from the Executive Director of Finance, Ms. Wendy Forsman, as to what the committee actually does now. And so the language that you now see in the proposed policy change is what the function of the committee is. And the strike through is information that is currently in the description of the committee, which is work, as I understand it, that the committee doesn't do. And so we want to just make sure that the description of the committee, what the committee is charged to do, is in line with what is actually being done.
Right.
So Ms. Forsman has indicated that this is what is actually being done now.
Mhm.
I agree.
I agree, and I'll tell you that the formulation of the capital improvement plan, we, as a board, as long as I've been on the board, have looked at capital improvement plan and been able to give input on what we wanted to do, because I know I spent years trying to push forward the improvements on Northern Shores and advocating for Northern Shores improvement, for New John F. Kennedy, for all sorts of things, just pushing things forward for what is now Fred Cherry, for new school. And other members on the board pushed forward their projects in their area and supported projects I wanted in my area and that kind of thing. So, you know, it's something we all did together when we were talking about capital improvement plans and other things that needed doing for the schools and voting on what should take priority. So I agree. I don't have any problem with that, because this is really actually what we do. Do you?
Yep, I agree. It's rephrased to really say what we actually
do.
And so this description pertains to major accounting changes in policy and or significant fluctuations in revenue and expenses that could affect operations, information about the annual resolution concerning authorizing the superintendent to spend down remaining funds in the operating fund, and independent audit reports and comments.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what the finance committee would be charged to do.
Right.
Okay. All right. Would you want this to be for a first and second reading, or do you also want this for first reading and adoption?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, it could be first reading and adoption, but if there's anyone who might have some heartburn over it, I don't have a problem with it being a first reading. What do you think, Ms. Brown?
I agree. First reading and adoption, and they can discuss it if they, feel that it should be delayed, then we can discuss that. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, what we'll then do is all of these policy changes we'll have on the agenda for next month's board meeting. And we'll have it on the agenda as a first reading and adoption, which will still allow board members to have comments about it. And if for some reason, I guess if the board is not comfortable in approving it on a first reading, they can always table it to the next meeting in November, which will then turn it into a first and second reading.
Right. Okay.
The last thing that we wanted to have some discussion about was the calling of special meetings of the school board, and whether you want to look at making any changes to that, or just what your thoughts were. As it currently stands, right now, special meetings of the school board can be called by either the chair or by two members of the school board. And I must say that policy is pretty consistent throughout the region, allowing either special meetings to be called by the chair or by two members of the board. There are, however, with some divisions, and it's probably in the minority, but there are some divisions that have a slight modification to that. Some may require more than two board members. Some may only require call meetings or special meetings called by the chair. So, if you want to give that some thought as to whether or not you want to look at changing that down the road, or if you want to just keep it as it is, that's certainly up to you. But I thought we would just put it on the agenda for some preliminary discussion.
I I don't, as a member of the board, I don't have a problem with the chair or the majority of the board calling for a special meeting. I do have a problem in the middle of a pandemic with people calling a special meeting a week after the meeting, if the special meeting is called because I made a recommendation and most of the people didn't agree with me. I think that's a whole nother thing. And it's like if because of the conditions of the special meeting, a certain number of people have to appear in person. We're in the middle of a pandemic, but a quorum has to appear in person, and the person calling the meeting is not present for the meeting. They're joining us in another place, which puts the people who have to come to the meeting at a physical disadvantage or in harm's way, because all of us have whatever. Phyllis and I have, well, most of the board members are in the age area where we're most at risk for the pandemic, for the disease. Secondly, we have either illnesses of our own or sick family members or small children who may be at rest or any of those other things. So if a meeting is called, it should be one that requires some urgent thing that we have to do. For instance, our August meeting, I have no problem, even though I disagree with the necessity. I came along because I felt that there was that people felt an urgency, so we changed the date of the meeting. And I understood that, and the majority of the board wanted to do that. So if the majority of the board felt that need, then of course I'm going to be there. But if the majority of the board doesn't come, we can't have a meeting. And I think, I'm torn with that. It's like there have to be some things put in place to say, you didn't vote along with me, so now I'm going to call a special meeting. I mean, I don't know I don't even understand that as a reason to have a meeting. You didn't go along with what I said, so I'm going to call a special meeting. And I've got somebody else to agree with me to do that. I think there needs to be a reason, one other than they called for the question and I lost my point, and now I'm going to call for a special meeting and I have somebody else to agree with me, so everybody has to come back. It's more like a punishment because everybody didn't agree with me or whatever. And if I can't be there for the meeting, but I'm forcing other people to come in the middle of a pandemic for a meeting, and they just voted not to do the thing that I'm trying to get them to vote on again, I just don't understand. So I'm thinking there need to be at least a majority of the board that wants to have this meeting if we're going to do that. So back to your original question, I would either think it's the chair that's calling the meeting or a majority of the board members who want to have this special meeting. One or the other.
I agree with that. The chair, majority of the members thinking that there's a need for a special meeting, right? There has to be a real need, an emergency situation. Also, should there be something in there considering the superintendent's ability to call a special meeting? Does he have that, or is that something that would be feasible to add to this? The chair, the superintendent, or majority of the board? What do you think about that, Dr. Mark?
Well, if the superintendent has a need, he would contact you. Right. That would be something that I would think he would.
But I don't know if we should have that in there, just for making it absolutely clear.
But I think that would be something that, since it's a board meeting, it wouldn't be the superintendent calling the meeting. Right. It would have to be. I don't think that would be added, but I think that's something that could be. Because he would make you aware of right. Whatever's there. Right. So it would be the chair, majority of the members. This is just my thinking now. You can give me your,
well,
what are the other folks doing? Because we'd be meeting after every meeting if we do this the way that we have it written now. And I'm sure in those systems, at least I feel comfortable thinking that that's not the way it's always done in every other school system. They don't have a meeting and then everybody who doesn't agree calls another meeting right after that meeting. I don't know. This, of course, is a different situation in the middle of a pandemic, but
maybe what you can do, just a suggestion, is at your next policy review committee meeting, I'll look at your current policy on the calling of special meetings and draft some language for you to consider, and that you can consider that at your next policy review committee meeting. And at which time you can then decide whether you like the language, whether you want to do something different with the language, and then whether you want that to go on to the full school board for them to debate it and vote on it.
That sounds good.
All righty. Anything else from either the chair or the vice chair concerning the policies?
I don't have anything. Do you, Judith?
no, I don't.
Okay. I know that my administrative assistant, she has been diligent in trying to put together this booklet for you with all the various policy changes. I think we'll get pretty close to having it completed. So you can be looking to get that very soon. At which time, I think you had indicated you wanted to then go to the quarterly meetings.
Yes.
So we'll make plans to try to set up the quarterly meetings once you get the booklet with all of the policy changes.
Okay, okay.
All righty. If there be nothing else from any of you, thank you so much for coming to the Policy Review Committee meeting today. And if there's nothing else, I guess we are adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Waller.
Thank you.